have been waiting for the show to come back for what feels like decades, ages, millennia. It's been a bit, but we're so back. Hi, I'm Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Season 2, Episode 1 of Interview with a Vampire. I have notes. We open with Daniel and Louis conducting the interview as they've been doing for the past week or so. Pausing. Sometimes with this show, I forget present day timeline that we're supposed to be on. I'm not always certain, I guess, how long time is passing in present day, because we are traversing decades, millennia, eons, it feels like, in the flashbacks. Time-wise, I'm not always certain where we are, but I'm rocking and rolling and I'm having a good time. The first scene where we're seeing Claudia, it's not supposed to be beautiful. They're literally in the middle of a war zone, but there's this beautiful piece of Daniel Hart's score that plays when we see Claudia emerge from the hole that they've been sleeping in, pretty much, as they go through these different war checkpoints. And it feels like a real giving flowers moment, and allowing a moment of shine to Delaney, who is stepping into this role in a kind of uncommon-ish way, but to have a moment where we are able to kind of soak in this is her Claudia now. This is her time, is the point that I'm trying to make. Louis and Claudia are going through these checkpoints, obviously murdering as they go throughout. Claudia is giving Louis the coldest of shoulders. Shoulder, icy shoulder. Deserved, honestly, because she's still upset with him for essentially placing them in an It Follows situation, with the it being Lestat, because he's coming whether they like it or not. And Claudia is a little bit rightfully pissed about that very fact. Louis, I'm gonna be on your ass in a second, just pause, okay? There's a lot of talk about dreams and sleeping in this episode, which I think gives us the first instance or window into this theme that they're going to be carrying throughout the season of memory, and how memory changes, and memory being a monster that we've seen in a lot of the marketing for the show. And there's a lot of talk about dreams because Claudia writes in her journal that she does not dream. As we get through the episode, we'll realize that may not be true. So it's got Louis thinking quite a bit about dreaming and what it means to dream and what it means to not dream. And he literally says, would you look forward to sleep, or would you be terrified when day broke? And then that's when Armand butts in and is just or is it the sleep of an infant? Basically kind of assuaging Louis' anxieties when it comes to these things, which also gives me a little bit of a window. I peeped a little bit of a thing with Armand, which is that he is very much so trying to keep Louis calm and at bay, mainly now that he's revealed himself in the most dramatic way possible, from being fake Rashid to being a 500-year-old vampire, the vampire Armand. Now he's kind of a part of the interview, but not really. He's just there, and it feels like a looming parent over a child who's not directly coaching the child to say certain things, but whose sheer presence is influencing what that person is going to say. That's Armand in this interview as of now. But Daniel's not having it, because he keeps they're such two bitter ex-boyfriends to each other, Daniel and Armand, because they just have these small little tit for tat moments. Daniel, every time Armand says anything, so when Armand says, or is it the sleep of an infant, Daniel immediately says, disregard. Disregard, as the vampire Armand is not on the record. That will change, obviously. So we're we're moving forward, and we're getting little glimpses of that dynamic that Armand and Louis have, and I think that they are definitely going to build upon that more as the season goes on. Obviously, something is afoot with Armand. I already knew it in the end of season 1. They're literally being books on a shelf that Louis couldn't get to that contain information, that already in and of itself is a little bit fishy-wishy. And Armand is definitely doing something. I don't know what, but he's doing something. But he is looking good while doing it. So he gets a pass from me. Moving on. One thing that really stuck out to me when they flash back is a quote that Louis says, which is, quote, "Claudia was a thing of little indecision, a manic tour guide," which definitely illuminates the depths of Claudia's anger towards Louis. Like, that one sentence alone, like his reading of Claudia, lets you know that Claudia, remember, as a Virgo woman, Claudia's a Virgo. So honestly, that should tell you kind of everything you need to know about just how upset she is at Louis fumbling their plan. She was so sure of her plan. She thought dozens of steps ahead of everyone, because remember, in the finale of season 1, her plan is temporarily foiled because Lestat mobilized, or I guess Antoinette gave herself a job to do after being turned into a vampire. And she was following Claudia, and she knew that Claudia was buying the like laudanum and arsenic to poison the boys that would eventually poison Lestat. And so he was like, "Oh, I'm ahead of you." And then Claudia was then ahead of him because she knew that Antoinette was following her. So like Claudia is always, if what feels like 1,000 steps ahead of everyone, and for the one thing to foil her plan being Louis' emotions, she's like, "Oh, I'm done. Like, I'm not having it with you." Rats. Like, she's had it officially. Honestly, it's just another like peg in the board of Claudia just only knowing disappointment by these vampires and only being failed by the people who are not supposed to fail her. Like, I think a lot of people forget the monologue that Claudia gives in episode 4 of season 1 when she's talking about who she was before she became a vampire. So her as a human, and how her family life was like absolutely terrible. She comes into this vampiric family who she serves, as Daniel says, is kind of like a band-aid to like a shitty marriage, and gets nothing but failed in the afterlife as well. Like, Claudia just wants to live life and be supported by the people who are supposed to love her, and in life and death she has not really gotten that thus far, even from Louis, who does love her, but he does fail her often. He also reads a passage from her journal directly, so we see it on camera, and again, this is him realizing just how disappointed she is with him, with the quote, "He asked me if we could go home. Home? Is there a more offensive question? Run back to New Orleans? Pry up his bones, why don't you? Louis Dupont du Lac, dead weight." When I tell you I screamed. I screamed at this quote because, oh, she got him. Actually, Louis, you gotta catch that. You have to catch that, because why did she gather you like that? Louis Dupont du Lac, dead weight? You're not coming back from that. We cut back to Dubai with Daniel kind of just wreaking havoc. Like, it's been like noted on Twitter so many times that Daniel is this like kind of, he's a sick human who has done nothing but like upend the lives of this like 100 plus and 500-year-old plus vampire, and it takes both of them going at it together in order to take down this like sickly old man who's just like not having it as far as any like sugarcoating or bullshitting, pretty much. And one thing that was so consistent through this episode was Daniel talking to real Rashid, who he calls him. We don't know where Rashid was all this time because Armand was acting as if he was Rashid, and then it was a grand reveal that he's not. Daniel just heckling real Rashid, who's just a guy trying to do his job. Like, he's in servitude to 2 vampires. He's just trying to get by. Like, his shift is done in 30 minutes. Like, he just wants to get off of work and go home. And Daniel is just like, "Ever read Moby Dick, real Rashid?" It's really just a jab at Armand. Again, bitter ex-boyfriends just going back and forth in this episode. It was so... One of the crowning moments of the episode, and I think a moment of note in the episode, was the appearance of Ghost Stat, or Ghost Lestat, or as Jacob Anderson calls him, Dream Stat. So this is a conjuring of Louis' mind and kind of just this amalgamation of his guilt and his desires and all these things. We get this image of Lestat that he kind of is talking to and is haunted by. Lestat always is haunting the narrative. And what was the biggest thing of note when the scene began was the pan up of Lestat's body as we last saw him dead in the finale of season 1. But when you look at those two images side by side of how Lestat seemingly, I guess, was when he died, and how Dream Stat looks kind of in the same position, he looks monstrous in season 1 finale. But in Louis' mind, as he remembers him still slain, kind of, he looks so angelic and beautiful. Also, just the imagery of Lestat laid out, arms stretched, very much so Jesus imagery. The Catholic guilt is never letting go of Louis. I found he's not letting go of it. He carries it with him just like he carries Lestat. It is never going away. But that was the one thing I was like, oh, Dream Stat looked gorgeous. And I was like, okay, yeah, Louis, of course you would remember your slain boyfriend as more beautiful than he was when you killed him, kind of. Sam Reed says that he mimicked a lot of the mannerisms and dialect of Jacob Anderson in this scene, because he kind of he wanted Dream Stat to be a reflection of Louis that much more. So obviously Dream Stat is living in Louis' consciousness, and the performance of Lestat in that moment definitely mirrors that. So it was very interesting seeing that scene when Louis says I do, and then Sam Reid almost perfectly parrots back I do with the same accent and bass and intonation and all those things. It was just a really, really great acting moment from both Jacob Anderson, who is so convincingly haunted but intrigued by Dream Stat's sheer presence, which he is conjuring. Louis is basically projecting this image of his lost lover, but then also Sam Reed's performance as Dream Stat that has this delicate nature, which tells you that even in his remembering of Lestat, Louis very much so has this very tender image of him, and we see that in Sam Reed's performance of Dream Stat. He's very soft and understanding almost, which doesn't really match the Lestat that we kind of see in season 1. But in his mind, he has this, again, very angelic view of his lover. Even though he knows that Lestat is probably pissed at him, he still has these aspects of his subconscious that are projecting this very quiet and beautiful and a bit earnest image of Lestat, which I thought was very, very interesting in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, that scene kind of ends with Dream Stat being I'm going to bloody kill you. Understandable. Apparently the original line, which some people were saying played, I think maybe at the premiere and a screening that they did the next day, was that the original line was I'm gonna fucking kill you, which I have noted. Let me see, what did I say in my notes? I said that is way hotter. Why did they change that? Hey, it didn't distract from the line. You get it. Lestat is upset. Dream Stat is upset. Louis knows that Lestat will be upset, but just thought that line was a little bit hotter. Take with a grain of salt. Another line or exchange of note was Lestat kind of poking Dream Stat poking fun at Louis and being like, oh, you killed me, whatever, which is what he did verbatim, I think. And Louis goes to apologize again and says like, I'm sorry. And Dreamstat is like, don't, like, you ruin it with remorse. And, you know, like he says like it was a death of distinction. Like it was a perfect betrayal. Like, so there's a subconscious of Louis that feels like Lestat would secretly be proud of him, I guess, for having the the balls to do it, or the balls to at least be complicit in the plan to try and kill him. I think he thinks that there's a piece of Lestat that maybe not take pity, but be like, you know what? I'm proud of you for trying to do that. Like that was real brave of you to attempt to do that, which it's crazy that in this moment he's like, you know, maybe what if he's proud of me for like trying to kill him? Which is very much so Louis coded. But I like that playful aspect that was happening in this scene. It was very, very fun. I had a lot of fun with this scene. with this scene. And then of course it ends with, you know, Dreamstat being like, I'm going to kill you. I'm just waiting for you to be happy, which is there's so many layers to that exchange between them, because to me, but the finale of season 1, Lestat is, I think, genuinely happy in a lot of moments, and maybe just for the entirety of it. Like, he is happy. And I always go back to that balcony scene that Lestat and Louis have before the big party, where you see like a little snapshot, a little glimpse, a sliver, if you will, of this really like earnest look that Lestat gives that feels strangely human, which is so not like him, which I think was just like a very pure look of love, I think, that he had for Louis in that moment, and that they kind of have for each other. And so that happening, and then he gets the murder done to him, kind of. I think that's what made the betrayal all that much bigger to Louis' subconscious reflecting Lestat. And so I think now the reverse is going to happen, where he's like, oh, Lestat's going to show up when I'm at my happiest. Like, that's when he's going to come and take me out. That's when it's going to happen. Like, again, it feels like they're in an It Follows situation where there's this like looming monster that's just following them. And you don't know when he's going to show up. So it just feels like you have to constantly be on the go to get away from him. But he knows that he's never going to get away from him. Hell, Lestat has rent. He's paying rent in Louis' mind. Actually, Louis is paying the rent of Lestat living in his mind, just up here 24/7, 25/8. As we're moving on, Claudia and Louis obviously are hitting these different checkpoints where they have to present papers and things like that. Claudia takes the lead, obviously, because she's killed so many soldiers, and she like forces them to teach her bits of their language, so she kind of can accrue a sense of you know, grammar and jargon that she can use basically to help them make passage through Romania as they're on their search for these old world vampires, which is her MO at this point. Like, she wants to find others. That's her whole motivation. And so at a certain checkpoint, she and Louis they hold out a picture. She holds out a picture and she's like, oh, I'm looking for my mom. And I noticed immediately that they're using a picture of Grace. Louis constantly, he never let go of the shreds of humanity that he still had, even if those shreds of humanity let go of him. So in season 1, basically, Grace kind of kills Louis almost. Like, she basically says, like, I have to do this for my family. Like, you basically have to be dead to me. And that is kind of the last bit of his family that he has ties with. But it was so heartbreaking and devastating that even after that, he still carries a picture of Grace. That just got me. I was like, oh. Ow. 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 Interview with the vampire. Ow. And then we meet Amelia, who is the woman that kind of takes them in pretty much temporarily to where she's, I guess, providing refuge for a lot of other people who have been displaced because of the war happening. And so she kind of defends them against the guards that are trying to trip them up and give them a lot of trouble through. And so they go to the factory where they meet the other people, including I think he's a British like journalist who was left behind, I think he says. But I thought it was very interesting too that in the moment when they walk in, Amelia's like, oh, they're Americans. They have booze and cigarettes, like, basically like they're friends. They come in peace, so to speak. The show never wants you to forget the layer and the lens in which we are viewing this narrative, and how race is one of those lenses. And so when they walk in, I couldn't help, as obviously a Black viewer, I know that look that everyone gave them. It wasn't, I don't think, because like they're Americans, but they come, bearing gifts. Like they were two Black Americans coming in, and everyone was just kind of like, I wouldn't say on their guard, but there was an apprehension in the air that was heavy. And again, it's those moments in the show where race is ever present. It is this like omnipresent thing within the narrative, and it is important to consider that always. Okay? So even just those little moments show how that is affecting their journey into getting to where they're trying to go. They meet other people. Louise sends Claudia off to play with the other kids, which she does not do at all, because at this point she is decades old, clearly. And she's like, I'm not going to play with kids at all. I'm not going to do that. Louis meets, or I guess not really meets, but starts to kind of fraternize with the British reporter guy and also Amelia a little bit more. And they kind of like get into this, a bit of a back and forth. One of the themes in the episode is kind of around, or I guess not really a theme, but a concept or idea that they are really toying around with in this episode is something like war. How does that affect a vampire? And there's this kind of oscillating ambivalence, but also like necessary presence, I guess, with vampires and their views on like things like war that are between humans. And there's a scene between Louis and the guy where he's like, after showing a picture of Grace, and basically like that's their story of like, oh, I'm looking for my wife and all these things, like that's why I was out there. The guy takes it as, oh, he must be like, he asked him like, are you a red? And Louis like, what? Like, and then he calls himself like a magical vodka Negro who's having like the first good night in a while. Like, he's not thinking about any of these things. And the guy is like, you're a Bolshevik. Like, all of these, like, he's asking him, trying to like see if he's like this war defector or something. Like he's asking him questions that Louis, not that he doesn't know what's going on, but couldn't care less, I guess. Like, Louis could not care less about any of these questions and treats it as such. For Louis, who is a vampire, he's like, oh yeah, like, is that it? Like, he's not taking anything that this guy is saying as being all that serious. What prompts this whole moment is Louis remembering like the way that something went down. I think he was saying like, oh, like Amelia wouldn't have said that in front of Claudia, basically meaning like wolves, something worse, like when she's talking about what's going on outside, pretty much. Like he remembers, he at first misremembered it and now has the memory coming back of what actually happened, which was he sent Claudia away, and Amelia comes back and they talk about, it's wolves or something worse out in the forest, pretty much. And that's helping him to unlock these memories. He's starting to get pieces of these memories back. And so that builds him with a bit of a rush, of feeling of like, I've got to know more, I've got to learn more, like there's something afoot, I'm missing things. Like, and when you know that you're missing memories and pieces, and like you're just wanting to keep doing what you're doing to find more of them, and that's where Louis is at this point. And his little Pookie Bear baby boo Armand is not having it. He's like, as Louis is remembering these things and getting exhilarated by the feeling of remembering, Armand wants to shut it down again. Like Louis getting a little bit too riled up, and so to keep him at bay again, Armand's like, maybe we should take a break. And Louis is like, no, I want to keep going. And that pisses Armand off, and he like storms off in a huff. And when Armand leaves, Louis, I think, kind of snaps out of his exhilaration of finding more memories, and he follows Armand with his eyes out of the room and looks just like a guilty child. Like he looks a little bit scared about Armand's reaction, or his impending reaction, I guess, to his insubordination a little bit, like to him being like, no, I want to keep going, and Armand being like, oh, well, you should take a break. Fascinating development there. Claudia is now in the woods. She meets the other children very briefly, and they're singing this song about like Anna, and I basically, it's like something in the woods. It's like a nursery rhyme type of thing, and they are like, they have this game where there's like this hole in the wall, and whoever can go the farthest, I guess, in the woods, like wins the game. Then this child comes up, and I can't tell if he's trying to touch her skin or what, but Claudia just shoves the hell out of this kid. She shoved the hell out of this kid and just went through that hole again. And that just shows, like, in that moment, you could just tell that while she may have looked like the other children, she is, again, a decades-old woman trapped in this child body. She just pushed him away, like out of her way. And I just thought, again, Claudia has so many little moments that just further illuminate that this show, when it wants to be, is a really great comedy. Because why did she push that boy like that? I don't know, but she did. Then she meets the zombie vampire, and this now reminded me of where we are in the book, because if you've seen the movie Interview with a Vampire, essentially all of the events that are happening in this episode of the show are not seen at all. They leave New Orleans after killing Lestat, and then we jump straight into Paris. But I thought it was pretty gutsy of this show to depict this particular part of the book, because no shade, this particular part of the book is a bit dry. It is a bit boring. It's like a little bit, it's just not all that compelling of a part of the story. And so I thought it was pretty, like, could be risky, I guess, to depict this particular part of the book on screen, because there is a lot, but not a lot that happens. And it is location wise, it's desolate. It's like, I think Louis describes it as monochromatic. Like, it is cold and dreary, and it just feels like the dregs. Like, it is, you're slogging through it a little bit. So this is the moment where I thought, like, okay, I know where we are in the book now, because Claudia meets this like zombie vampire thing, and he is just chomping down on these soldiers who were trying to lure the vampire in, I guess, to kill him, but that didn't happen, so they got maimed. But she is almost like trying to make a friend, because she can tell that this vampire looks a little old as hell, and she's like, look, like, this is how you do it, like, this is how you like drink blood. And the guy, like, this is a vampire that is like basically post-verbal, like, you're not really getting a combo. You're not really getting a little, hi, how are you, my name is situation out of this particular type of vampire. Where she tries, and she's like, she feels that feeling of like, I knew I was right. Like, Louis was doubting me this entire time, but I knew I was right. But then we cut to Louis and Claudia essentially getting ready to sleep in this factory where they have to like rip up the floorboards and like metal and do all this stuff. And so this gets to when Claudia and Louis have their first kind of extended conversation. At this point in the episode, I think the thrill of the hunt of trying to find other vampires has kind of relinquished the spell of the cold shoulder that she's been giving to Louis. And she's telling him like, I knew it. I told you there are other things, like there are other beings like us out here. I've seen it. Like I've seen it with my own eyes. And he's like, oh, like, you know, you're basically like, you're full of it. Like there's no way, all these things. And this is when it gets particularly interesting between the two of them. There's a lot of really great lines in this scene, mainly Claudia to Louis Dupont du Lac dead weight, that are hilarious. The vampires don't matter to you, but if he can't take you ballroom dancing and tell you you're pretty, to hell with him. Is that right? Like she basically saying like, you don't care about these vampires because you can't like fuck them pretty much. Again, Louis Dupont du Lac dead weight, catch it. She threw it, you gotta catch it, because that's so true. She's like, oh, you don't care about any vampire that's not one that you love or are in love with and would be in love with you. Like, you don't really care about the species beyond the ones that you have these romantic connections with. He talks right through that point. But it's so true. And then right after that, she says, I forgave you for messing up my plan. I don't forgive you for bringing him with you, him being Lestat. And Louis, tries to deny that he's carrying Lestat with him, but Claudia knows like what he's carrying with him, basically, because then she says, you slow us down. Your guilt over killing Lestat and all of these feelings that you're harboring for him, you're slowing us down from our mission to find more people like us. And Louis really has to sit with that, because that's very true. Like I said, like all of these feelings that he has, and we've already now seen his interactions with the embodiment of these manifestations and desires and guilt, more importantly, that Louis has over killing Lestat. We see it now. It's fully haunting him, but he wants to act like, oh, like, no, I'm fine. I'm so chill. In fact, like, I am not haunted by any narrative, let alone one of my hot and sexy dead boyfriend. And reader, he was not okay. And Claudia's calling him out, rightfully so. She says, change the subject when the truth blinds you, period. And then Louis kind of lauds back a very interesting point of like, what are you going to ask him if he could talk? Like the zombie vampire. Like, what are you going to ask him if you could talk? Like, you know, who made you? Who made the one who made you? Like, you know, are you trying to find? He says, like, what are we looking for here, Claudia? Adam and Eve of the damned. And it's so funny that eventually we will meet the queen of the damned. And it can't be soon enough. But it's just one of the tragedies of a character like Claudia, because like, yes, she wants to find out like why are we, like, where did all of this come from? Like, who is the mother or father of all vampires? What are we looking for here? Adam and Eve of the Dam? Well, yes. Give it a few decades and Lestat is going to answer that question in vivid detail. And then he gets into like God, like, you know, God, are we looking for God, Claudia? And kind of says it a bit condescendingly. But it's so funny because Louis and Claudia are alike in that they are seeking salvation. And I don't mean that necessarily in a one-to-one religious sense, but Claudia and Louis seek salvation and want to be, I think, saved, I guess. We see Louis do it with him glomming onto any vampire that is hot and looks at him within a 5-mile radius. And Claudia seeks it in both companionship and knowing that she can't really have it, but also just like this journey of knowledge that she wants, that she feels like it's being gatekept from her. Like they both kind of want the same things, but it's funny that Louis acts like he doesn't, when they're very alike in that way. Like they both believe in something higher than themselves that may not be God, just an entity that is there to protect them without restriction. Essentially, that's what they're both seeking. And Claudia is much more out in front with it, whereas Louis, I think, tends to run away from that being something that he well and truly desires. And then she kind of wraps it all up with like, I've met 4 vampires in my life and you're all the worst. And we kind of get the mission statement of this thing. She just wants to find a good vampire out there and find more good in vampires. They can't all be this, is pretty much what she's saying. And again, she gives, like, she throws at Louis to kind of sit with. He does have to reckon with that. Yes, he was a part of Claudia's creation and the whole reason why she has to deal with this in the first place. And she's right. All the vampires that she's met have been the worst in their own special ways, Louis included. And he has to sit with that. He's got to eat that. He absolutely has to eat that. But then we get a transition into one of Jacob Anderson's future award-winning performances in this episode, which is him talking about how he sees Claudia dreaming. And she wrote down that she didn't dream. So that means that maybe not everything that she's saying is exactly how it happened. Like maybe she said it to assuage his fears, because he said that he doesn't really like dream. But she did dream. Like she does dream. He's watching her sleep and he is reminded of like, she was dreaming, even though she said in her journal that she didn't. And so then they show kind of a flashback of all of his memories that I think they're potentially going to be revisiting as the episode, or not episode, but the season goes on, which is the famous, like, was it raining Louis scene, the scene in episode 5 where Lestat drops him from the sky, and then the scene in the finale where he's having a fight with Claudia over whether to burn Lestat's body or not. Like these are glimpses of memories that Louis may or may not have access to, that he can now have access to. They're like, it's very much so like Celine Dion, it's all coming back to me now. Like that's what Louis is feeling in this moment, and he gets overwhelmed with emotion because he says something to the effect of like, there's like things surfacing from the water, like they're coming to the surface. Like I feel like I'm accessing things that I just didn't know that I didn't have access to for these years, like decades and years and hours and months. Like he's like, it's all coming back to me now. Like it really, like that is the song of this episode. It's all coming back to me now. Word to Celine Dion. And he has this really compelling moment of just raw emotion where we see that little like vampire tear, little blood tear, where he's just sobbing. He's just like, thank you for helping me find these memories. And it's not funny because Louis is legitimately feeling so grateful to be able to now be on this journey of accessing memories that he didn't know that he had lost. But Daniel is like very much so, he seems like he doesn't know how to respond to this type of emotion. And he just says, you want to take that break now? But it was a really just gorgeous monologue from Jacob Anderson. Again, a lot of people have been comparing it to the confessional monologue from episode 1 of season 1. That's still my favorite acting performance of recent memory. I don't know if this scene is quite on that level, but it is incredibly good. It's incredibly good. So good. Phenomenal performance, just phenomenal scene altogether. And just absolutely hilarious interference from Daniel, just not really knowing how to handle an excess of emotions in that way. He's like trying to be the hardened, journalist and investigator, and then he wasn't expecting to basically become the Dr. Phil of the situation. He's like, oh, too much emotion, no thanks. But he's so incredibly thankful to Daniel, because Daniel's prodding is what is conjuring these emotions to come back. Because the one that I remember is like Daniel's the one who to ask, like, oh, was it raining, Louis? And that's when Louis kind of playing with his like internal like head playback of what's happening. And same thing happens in the finale, where Daniel kind of goes on this tirade of like, Claudia wanted to burn Lestat's body to finish it, and you didn't. You knew that sending him to the dump, he could feast on rats and live, and you didn't want to do that. Like, you didn't want to kill him. Like, this is your fault. And that's when Louis like running away from him and doesn't want to hear it. And that's when Armand comes in again to calm Louis, because these memories are coming back, and I don't know from a literal like production sense if what we saw are the memories that Louis had suppressed or has suppressed himself, that happened, or are they misrememberings? Like, we don't really know what these things are necessarily, but we know that he is troubled by remembering the events in that way. So that's when you see those scenes, like we see Lestat being killed, but we see the scenes spliced together of Louis fighting with Claudia over the need to burn the body, Louis crying, like screaming in agony and pain over having killed his lover, like all of these things like he doesn't want to reckon with. But now they're coming back to him. He's having to reckon with them, and I think he welcomes that. What is Armand's involvement in this moment? What is Armand's involvement in the potential suppressing of Louis' memories? He did something. So hopping back into the past, we get Amelia. She's now been attacked by one of the zombie vampire things, and they are trying to figure out like, oh, like how do we, kill her? Like, oh, should we shoot her? Like, no, we have to cut off her head. And like the British reporter guy like doesn't want that to happen. They're like, no, like we can save her. Like, Louis, help me. And Louis and Claudia are just kind of looking at all of this unfolding. And Louis says the line, quote, "Human affairs, death, and how to avoid it. Their problem. Our concern is in the woods." And again, that shows that ambivalence to the theater of war that's happening around them. Like, the petty human squabbles of war and conflict have nothing to do with vampires. But then, as we see, it does have something to do with them, because they need humans for sustenance. They need humans to live. Claudia finally convinces Louis that yes, something is out in the woods, and they go and look for it. And that's when the creature finally shows up, and Claudia's like, see, told you. And Louis is like, and she's like, it's a vampire. And he's like, I'm a vampire. That is a fucking catfish with teeth. And that's when he's just like, ugh, like, I don't know about that. Like, he's very much so like, Claudia is intrigued and like not at all put off by this zombie vampire's appearance, and Louis is very much so like disgusted, like fully disgusted by the presence of this creature. Claudia's like still trying to communicate with the creature and be like, you and us, like we're the same. And Louis is like, like I am not the same thing as whatever that is. And then eventually they're attacked by the zombie vampire, and then another vampire who looks a little bit more an old world vampire essentially, and Claudia, they get into a tussle because the zombie vampire attacks Louis, and so Claudia then jumps on his back and rips out his eyes, as you do, and then because of that, the old world vampire is like, you killed, like you took the eyes of a child, like it was just a child, like a child, not an actual child, but like in vampire years, like a very young vampire that had just been turned. And so then she kills the zombie vampire because she was like, how will he hunt with no eyes? Which is a valid question, I suppose. Then she goes off to her little cottage, and Louis and Claudia follow her, and this is when they now are able to communicate with the vampire that's an old world vampire for the first time. She says at a certain point, because she tries turning a soldier who she kind of killed or whatever, she tries giving the soldier her own blood to try and turn him, and it's not working. Like, he's gurgling. Like, it's not at all really like we see with Louis being turned or Claudia being turned. Like, the process is very, very different. Like, this soldier is not really taking to the blood, which is ultimately what is causing the creation of these zombie vampire things that are rummaging through the forest, which are her children. And she says, that's when Louis is just like, the blood is bad here. It's not good here. It's affecting our quality of life, essentially. And she says something to the effect of like, another one like a burnt tray of bread. Like, she's tried with so many of these people to turn them, and it's just not working out. And I put, like, these old world vampires have died another death, a far more gruesome one. They fed on the blood of the living dead, essentially. And because of that, they've lived a miserable existence as vampires because of the humans. Further kind of highlights this very tenuous connection between humans and vampires, and it shows that it's not so black and white, which is kind of what I've been talking about, where it's kind of like, we care and we don't care. In many ways, human affairs have nothing to do with vampires. Squabbles that they see, like wars, don't really affect vampires because they've been around forever, so they've seen hundreds of thousands of human conflicts and wars and things like that crop up, and they all tend to start over the same things: land, oil, food, money. So to vampires, it's like, oh, I've seen it before. Like, it's like a rerun. It's like, okay, I know what this is. Like, it really doesn't matter to me all that much. But these vampires do need humans to live. And these humans are impacted by these conflicts that, if they're not eating because there's no food, they're not going to live and have a good quality of life and any real health. And so that impacts the vampires who are feeding on them. It's very much so like circle of life coded, like we are all connected in the great circle of life, word to Mufasa. But that's essentially what's going on here. And another example is like a food desert, which we see in many places across the United States and around the world, where you have these centers of living areas where people are staying that are basically completely inaccessible to foods that provide any real nourishment. So when you have just only access to processed foods and everything, that affects greatly your health and quality of life. Essentially, these vampires are in a blood desert. Like, there's not really much good blood for them to feast on, which is ultimately impacting their quality of life. It's the same thing. So human affairs and why wars start may not impact vampires, but the human condition of things like war directly impact vampires, and we see it with the old world vampires. So then, obviously, the conversation ends where Claudia and Louis think that this old world vampire is going to go back with them and get stronger again. And she says as much like, I'm going to get stronger and I'm going to tell you my story. And then she ends her line of dialogue and just basically it's just like, we own nothing. Basically, like, this vampire shit is for the birds. And she throws herself into the fire, thus kind of ending this lineage of old world vampires at least in this region. And Claudia is obviously devastated. She's devastated by this because she had done so much and had so much faith and believed so hard that she could find another, and she did, and she's gone. Claudia, you suffered more than most, and my heart goes out to you, niece. It really does. All she does is look beautiful and suffer, and I don't like that. Louis and Armand, and they're having a conversation in their bedroom. Obviously, very interesting mise en scène that we see, because their bedroom the wall lined with bars. Now, what could we assume by that? Somebody's imprisoned, mental prison up there. By who? From who to who? We could assume Armand is from Louis, but the imagery of the bars in their bedroom are speaking very loudly to what's going on within this dynamic. And it's literally, this scene literally has Louis asking Armand to see the pages from Claudia's journal that they took out. Now we could assume maybe who was like, oh, we should take out these pages from this journal, because Armand says, well, my name is in some of those pages. And Louis kind of just blows through that point. It's just like, yeah, that's great. But like, I need to see what I don't have access to memory wise. Like, what am I missing? And he's having to ask his partner in order to have like access to these pages. And Armand is just like, we agree that you wouldn't see the pages again and things like that. And, then they very quickly get off the conversation of looking at the pages to going to what Daniel is doing, in that he's taking control of this interview. Louis losing control of it. And so eventually the two decide, in order to combat Daniel's prodding, which I think secretly the ulterior motive for Armand is that Daniel's prodding is penetrating Louis' memory and allowing him to remember things, and that he does not want that to happen. For what reason, we don't know yet, but he doesn't want that to happen for one reason or another. And so he then is just like, you know what? We can find that bumbling boy from San Francisco that we met all those years ago, who didn't even know the gravity of the story that he was hearing. Like, we can get that boy again, because this, old journalist who is putting his nose where it doesn't belong, that's not going to work. That's not going to work for us. And so ultimately they decide to have Armand finally go on the record when the next day, when Daniel comes back to continue the interview. And it's just very funny that in that moment they come out to meet Daniel the next day, and they're like holding hands, and they're just so like, we're in love coded. Like, they're just so like, oh my God, like, this is my boyfriend, and we've been dating for 2 weeks and we're in love, even though they've been together for 70 years, but still. That's just the look of them walking out together, holding hands, and like sitting so close together on the couch and everything. They're such teenagers with each other. They begin to start back up the interview, and Louise basically talking about how now Claudia and himself, they've hitched a ride heading into Paris. And Armand tries to begin to speak during the interview. And Daniel is just like, oh, we're going to get to you. We'll get to you, but zip it for right now. And I think that, to me, I'm not going to say what the showrunners and creators had to say or not, but it felt like a direct creators of the show to the audience, mainly to the people who have read the book and who are very aware of Armand's character in a way that the regular person watching the TV show may not. Because, again, for the people who have read the books, you have to remember that someone who's watching the show, who really maybe only may know Armand's character through the extent of the movie, they don't really know as much about book Armand. So there's a lot of details with book Armand that we haven't seen depicted on screen ever yet. So it felt like in that moment with Daniel being like, we'll get to you, is almost like the show saying directly to fans of the book, like, hey, we'll get to him, but you gotta rock with us until we get there. Like, you gotta have to be a bit patient. Like, don't jump the gun, which I think is a very interesting thing that the show, to me, has done, which is basically to say to people who are fans, like, hey, we are honoring the source material. We are honoring what this story is and its characters, but we're also doing something different because the book is a book, but this show is a TV show. It's a completely different medium, and they're not doing a one-to-one adaptation for television. They're telling their own story that fits within the medium of television, which means that, you know, you got some time to depict things, and they're making these very purposeful changes. And so they're asking, I think, those who are fans of the franchise to remember that. Like, it may not be a one-to-one. This may not be the Armand that you know, or maybe the Armand that you know. We don't know just yet, but I think that moment of Daniel just being like, we'll get to you, was the show's moment of like, hold your horses, guys. Like, we will get there. Just trust us. I'm not to say that I'm like this huge, like I've read all the books, because I'm still going through the process of reading them, but I think just what I've seen with the discourse around season 1, which was, I think at certain points it was fans of the book versus fans of the show, and kind of this contention that was happening. Whereas I think just as long as we understand that this is a show made for the medium of television, and at the end of the day is a television show, not a one-to-one adaptation of the books, I think you enjoy it a whole lot more when you have that in mind. But what do I know? So then that lands us in the final scene of the episode, where we hit Jacob Anderson's second future award-winning performance, where he's talking to Claudia, who is obviously incredibly hurt by this development that she's seen with this old world vampire basically eliminating herself from this world, and she feels this sense of loneliness. Like, she thought in finding her she wouldn't feel so alone, but she does, because she knows that Louis will always have companionship in a way that she won't really ever experience, because of her being a woman trapped in a child's body. That eliminates her from experiencing companionship in the same way that he can. So this is just further illuminating Claudia's loneliness. Like, she's incredibly lonely. She has no one who I think gets her in the way that Louis might have had someone who got him. And so this is when he's like, you know, hard words and soft words, which is the most Southern way of saying, like, we're going to have a difficult conversation. Hard words, soft words, hard words. And that's when he goes in and is just like, you know, quit feeling sorry for yourself. Like, our life is shit. Like, it's going to be shit. Like, all these things. And I was like, oh, it's real rich coming from the queen of I feel sorry for myself sometimes, Louis, to tell her, oh, don't feel sorry for yourself. Why, pray tell, would she feel sorry for herself? Is it because she is now basically on the run from the vampire who was abusive to her and abusive to you, who she was trying to protect you from, but you foiled her plans? Louis, was it perhaps the, you know, just continued real just trust of everyone and just completely going against the plans streak that you like to have, Louis? Is it the fact that you were the reason why she is now a vampire riddled with these problems for decades on, forever, essentially? Is that the reason why she may be feeling a little bit sorry for herself, Louis? Like, why is it a shock to you why that she might feel a little bit down in the dumps about herself and her situation? I was like, oh, it's real rich coming from you, Louis Dupont du Lac, dead weight. Don't piss me off. He then gets into the soft words, which he says something so poignant and beautiful, which was, you know, if you were the only vampire in the world, it would be enough. And, you know, as long as you walk the earth, I'll never meet the fire. Basically being like, I'm never going to get to that point where I don't want to be around and want to be with you. Like, he's promising his companionship to her, as her kind of only real family left. Like, he's promising, like, I'm going to be there for you. I'm not going to fail you. Like, I'm going to be there. And she is trusting it, I think, and I think that's what she needed to hear in that moment. But in that moment, when he says, if you were the only vampire on earth, it would be enough for me, we see her And then we see the camera pan towards Dreamstat, who is also in the truck with them. And it begs the question. It begs the question of who was he talking to in that moment? And it shows that Louis is such a character of absolution. He is such a character of it is this or that. He can't hold space for it being enough for Claudia and Lestat. There's kind of this like feeling where he has to choose. And the problem that he has with Claudia is that he's never been able to hold space for her too. It's always been this or that. And ultimately that is what caused the foiling of her plan, was him not being able to hold space for her as well. And that's where we end up with everything happening in the way that it was. The pan to Dreamstat, I was just like, this show's trying to kill me. Because you really are just like, who's Louis talking to in that moment? And then he goes into this you and me and you and me. And again, it feels more and more with every me and you and me that he says, it becomes almost like he's convincing himself. Like it's me and Claudia and me and Claudia. But you can feel that his mind is interrupting him with like me and Lestat and me and Lestat. Like there's always going to be this dance between him and Lestat and him and Claudia, like of who will be enough for him. And I think he knows. I think a piece of him knows that it's always going to be Lestat. And I think a piece of Claudia knows that as well. And that is what makes it just heartbreaking. It makes it so heartbreaking. And then things kind of wrap up with this look that Dreamstat gives to Claudia, which again, Dreamstat is a conjuring of Louis' subconscious. And I think he feels, and someone on Twitter said it so beautifully, which is something to the effect of like his conscious projection of Lestat still has Lestat maybe feeling not angry totally with Claudia, but fully angry with him. Like I think he would maybe take pity on Claudia. In his mind, Louis may think that Lestat may take pity on Claudia, may not be upset with her, but would be upset with him. And maybe this is Louis' subconscious wanting to not have Lestat be vengeful towards Claudia, but rather be vengeful towards him. And again, this is this absolution idea of like, you know, this or that, black or white, you know, up or down type of thing, where he's like, maybe this is like, it would be a better situation if he was more upset with me than upset with Claudia. Like, this is how I can protect her after I failed her. Like, his anger should be directed at me, like not her. And again, it adds all of those layers, those beautiful layers. And if you know where we're heading, it makes those lines that much more compelling. And it just was painful. That's the word I'm looking for. Painful is what it was. And that ends the episode. So ultimately, I think the episode was great. I will say, upon a first watch, I was a little bit not disappointed, because the show still operates on a level of excellence that most shows don't even dream of being real. But it was hard not to, on the first watch, compare the season opener of this season and last season's opener, which was the pilot, which I hold up is a show. It's a show that has a perfect pilot to me. And I'm going to talk about that at a certain point, don't you worry. But this premiere wasn't quite that, obviously. Like the purposes are different, and the setup is different, and all these factors are affecting that. But then as I kind of sat and chewed on it and talked with other people, I was like, I know what this episode is. It functions more like a special episode to me versus a season premiere. And what I mean by special episode is like an episode that airs between two seasons, that is like maybe the midpoint between like 6 months after the season finale of one season and 6 months before the premiere of that next season, like a standalone episode, an episode that kind of can stand on its own, kind of like a bottle episode, where there are conflicts that are introduced and resolved in one episode, but there are themes that are then carried into the next season. That's what this episode felt like to me. It felt like a special episode that was meant to address Claudia and Louise' kind of strife that happened post episode 7 or 8 in season 1. So it's basically the fallout of that with each other, but then also just setting us up for where we're headed with Paris. Because location wise, obviously Paris and New Orleans have a lot more in common than Romania and New Orleans do. Louise says it, Paris is the mother of New Orleans. So there's going to be this similar but different feeling when they finally get into the intricacies that Paris has to offer. And with them, obviously, eventually meeting the other vampires in the theater troupe and things like that. But Romania was this different location where you kind of had to be, again, I was like, it's the dregs, you're just dragged down. And it's just this heavy and cold and kind of sad and melancholy feeling. But I think it was necessary to kind of get us ready for where we were heading with season 2. So I almost see season 2, episode 2 as being the premiere because they will have been in Paris and of really getting into the events that are going to happen in Paris. But this felt like a special episode. And I don't mean that like special episode derogatory. I mean that special episode complimentary. It was kind of its own thing, like a bit of a bottle episode, but never a filler episode. It's not just like something that was the like something that happens before they get to Paris. Like this idea of it being an episode that has purpose and that it addresses these things that are happening between Claudia and Louis that need to be out and that need to be talked about. And they talk about it in the little talkback thing that happens after the episode, where they said that the intention early on was to do all of the events of the book in season 1. And there was always going to be either an episode or a moment where it was post New Orleans, pre Paris, where they are, which happens in the book, where Claudia and Louis are, traversing through these different cold landscapes. And so obviously there was always going to be what essentially this episode is, which I think is called A Moment of Upheaval by one of the producers for Claudia and Louis. So this episode, on the first watch, I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like a season premiere. But then on the second watch, when I looked at it through the lens of it being that kind of special episode, its own thing, it has its own things that it's addressing, its own problems, its own conflicts, its own resolutions, and themes that it wants to introduce that will carry into the rest of the season. I was like, there it is. That's the way that I had to look at it. And I think, again, it was gutsy. It was ballsy to do that with how like lush and vibrant the pilot of the show is, against this, which is not that at all. It was incredibly gutsy, but I think where it sets us up will only work in the show's favor to me. For all intents and purposes, the season premiere was fantastic, and I am so excited for the rest of the season. I'm so excited. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, comment your favorite part of this episode and something that you're looking forward to for this season. I'm looking forward to anything that has to do with Claudia. I think Delaney Hales' performance showed what I already knew, which was that she is going to be a knockout in this role. And I think she is perfectly slotted into where we are in the show and like where Claudia is as a person. And I'm just really looking forward to it. And don't forget that I am Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro, but I'll see you again next week.